I know you're hungry, so be quiet, guys. We're gonna eat. Hey, guys, we're gonna eat in a minute. Here's the audio archives. I know what eat while we watch audio archives.
You tried the sandwich yet? You know that crispy chicken on toasted
Too
burrito.
far to go.
It's like,
Too damn far to go to Popeyes because I don't. There's another around here. Louisiana Kitchen? I don't think so. I'm not going to. Nah, I'm not going to Baton Rouge. That's where it is. I'm not going to Baton Rouge to get chicken.
And welcome to a truly turned on, or should I say switched on edition of the Oddity Archive. Now, a few years back, I did an episode revolving around all the cash-ins following Elvis Presley's death, which I dubbed Elvis-sploitation. Well, today I've got a whole new strain of fill-in-the-blank exploitation to cover, and that would
There's an else
be
one.
Carlos-sploitation. So, back in the fall of 1968, one of the all-time great unlikely hits was released, and it was this little album called Switched On Bach. And as you can probably guess, it's a bunch of Bach pieces. But the twist is, and hence the name, is that they were performed on this newfangled thing called a Moog synthesizer,
Big sucker.
which in turn
There's a fun board.
inadvertently launched its own subgenre. In 1964, Dr. Robert A. Moog introduced his namesake synthesizer at that year's AES, or Audio Engineering Society, convention in New York City. While it wasn't the first synthesizer, it was the first one to not take up a whole room and
Damn.
to be playable
57.
with a traditional keyboard and or ribbon controller as
Ooh.
opposed to computer punch cards. Unsurprisingly, the first customers were avant-gardists and TV commercial producers who saw it as more of a noise box than anything else. By the end of 1967, the Moog had appeared on albums from the likes of Mort Garson, The Doors, if only to run a vocal effect, and The Monkees. But it was still mostly just used for spacey noises. In 1968, composer and electronic music tinkerer Walter, henceforth Wendy Carlos,
Still living.
set out to prove the musical validity of the synthesizer. In other words, make a conventionally identifiably musical record with a largely unproven new instrument. Working directly with Bob Moog, Wendy made some amazingly then unheard of suggestions, such radical suggestions as making the keyboard touch sensitive, like a piano or an organ or any number of other keyboard instruments. In addition, the original Moogs were legendarily unstable. Among other quirks, the Moog would often drift out of tune within minutes. Tellingly, Moog suggested all early users of his synth keep one of his technicians on hand while recording. But the real challenge of early synths in general was the fact that they were monophonic, as in could only produce one note at a time. It took 5 months of constant, painstaking work on an 8-track machine, no less, as there was at the time, but clear, workable renditions of 10 Bach pieces were created.
Wow.
In October of '68, Switched On Bach was released. Despite my best efforts, I have found no period reviews. Having said that, the conventional wisdom is that it was savaged by the critics, the main criticism being that Carlos was fixing what wasn't broken. Kind of missing the point there, which is at times belabored in the album's liner notes. Despite this, the album was embraced by progressive and freeform FM radio, as well as some TV stations and networks, usually as bumper music. Between the extra exposure and word of mouth, the album proceeded to hit number 10 on the Billboard 200 chart in April of 1969,
Wow.
and topped the classical album chart for an astounding 3 years.
Wow.
Before the 60s were out, Carlos herself managed to get a sequel out the door, and unwittingly usher in a slew of imitators and general, usually quickly and cheaply made, synthesizer albums. Having said that, these albums really ran the gamut. Some were perfectly solid jazz or classical albums. Some were harsh and avant-garde, and at times hilariously pretentious. Some were bland, easy-listening fluff. Some were relaxing soundscapes, but most were just cheesy. The Carlos-sploitation trend ended around 1972, but funnily enough, when Billboard stopped carrying a classical album chart at the end of 1973, Switched On Bach was still in its upper echelon.
85. Wow.
If you've got an in-service turntable at home, Switched On Bach is one of those rare thrift store staples that I actually do
Empty turntables.
recommend picking up. And yeah, the sounds proper are pretty dated at this point, but you really got to appreciate the sheer craftsmanship that went into this record.
I bet.
The performances are really good and tight, and the arrangements are still pretty creative. So if you can get past the dated synth sound, it's well worth the effort. But of course, we're not here to give the umpteenth unnecessary butt kissing to already acknowledged classic albums. This is the Oddity Archive. We're all about detritus around here. So with that, I picked out 4 albums that I personally say qualify as Carlos-sploitation. And each one of these is meant to hit at least one of the major musical areas that these things went into. So with that in mind, let's finally get down to business here. Today's first album is actually the only really explicit Switched On Bach knockoff that we're covering today. Now, hopefully you're at least a little familiar with a songwriter by the name of Burt Bacharach.